When you're investigating leaks at the Department of Justice and the FBI, I hope you will include the Mueller team as well.
All right. That voice, that man you know quite well, Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, who joins us right now. Senator, good to have you. You were obviously referring to, well, of course, the legion of leaks in this entire process, but more to the point, the leak of the letter itself from Bob Mueller's letter to the Attorney General. Do you interpret that leaked letter as a sign that Mueller and Barr were and are at odds on the findings of this report?
I don't. Well, first, Neil, very good question. There are very few coincidences in politics, and I don't think it was a coincidence that Mr. Mueller's letter leaked the day before Mr. Barr's testimony. A lot of people got their bowels in an uproar over it. It turned out to be much ado about nothing. My issue was very simple. Okay, Mr. Mueller was unhappy. It turned out he was unhappy about the press coverage. Turned out he was unhappy because he didn't like the way that Mr. Barr wrote his letter. All that's academic now because we have a final copy of the report. So my question was real simple. Has Mr. Mueller changed his mind? Has he changed his conclusions? Prosecutors either indict or they don't indict. Now, Mr. Mueller said no indictment on conspiracy, no indictment on collusion, no indictment on obstruction of justice. So if he's changed his mind, I want to know. He has not changed his mind.
Do you think the fact that he did on obstruction, sir, and I'm not a lawyer, but was built on the idea that you can't indict a sitting president?
No, Mr. Barr testified very clearly. He said, I met with Mr. Mueller. I met with, there were a number of people in the room. He said, Mr. Mueller was asked, is the reason you're not recommending an indictment on obstruction of justice because of the DOJ policy that you can't indict a sitting president? Mr. Barr said, Mr. Mueller said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that's a very false narrative.
Well, if you're Bob Mueller, and I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, if you're Bob Mueller and you think that the Attorney General, the guy to whom you're submitting this report, has a certain view on obstruction and what is allowed and what's not, that essentially Mueller pulled his punches, because that was kind of the impression from the letter from Mueller, in which he said that Barr created public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation.
I saw that, and I asked Mr. Barr about that. Here's what and look, I don't know, Neil, but here's what I think. I think Mr. Mueller thought that Mr. Barr's letter was not nuanced enough. Okay, that's academic, because now we have the report. Mr. Barr's letter doesn't matter anymore. I think Mr. Mueller was upset about the news coverage. Well, I don't know what he expected Mr. Barr to do about it. That's up to the news media to cover it like they want.
It seems like he's blaming Barr, and I'm making this leap here, so I want to stress that. He's blaming Barr for providing the juice for that coverage.
I think they're trying to make Mr. Barr look bad, yeah. I think that's part of, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. I think some of my Democratic friends are in good faith here. They've read the report. It's done. They're ready to move on.
Well, a lot of those Democratic friends, as you know, sir, are saying, Cory Booker and a host of others, I think 3 or 4 others are saying Barr should resign. How do you feel about that?
I know, and that's patently absurd. Many of my Democratic friends, not all, but many of them, are not in good faith. I mean, Trump could come out tomorrow solidly in favor of children and prosperity, and they would say he's wrong. And this is the theory of the case now for some of my Democratic friends. Trump covered up a crime that nobody committed. Now, that's what they're down to. This thing is over. It's over. It's a 488-page report. They threw everything they had at the president, 500 witnesses, 500 subpoenas, 3,000 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, 20 lawyers, $25 million. It was a cross between an endoscopy and a colonoscopy. And here's what they said. No indictment. Let me repeat it. No indictment. It's over.
But
it's
let me ask you this. In the Senate, it might be over. I mean, you guys have had this chat and this back and forth with Attorney General Barr. Now, we're told he is scheduled to go before the House Judiciary Committee tomorrow. But the difference there is they're going to have lawyers interrogating him. I'm not talking about the elected lawyers. How do you
Right.
feel about that? If you were to advise the Attorney General, what would you tell him to do?
Well, I think it's an insult to the members of the House. Does the chairman think his House members aren't competent enough to cross-examine or to examine the Attorney General? They got to rely on staff. I mean, I know there's some instances where you do need staff, but I don't know why they would need it here. Look, this is an effort. Let me say it again. Many of my Democratic friends have moved on, but some of them haven't, and they're never going to move on.
All right.
This is about the next election instead of the next generation.
We shall see. Senator, thank you very much.
You
More
bet.
to this.